Check. Can Zoom hear us? Did anybody answer?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Thank you. He'll announce that, but there's questions on the back table, so he's only gonna be taking questions written, and he'll address them after there's two presentations, so he'll address those after that. Okay. So one question is because, a lot of the presidents and one person is here, kind of, comments about the park design. Right, so we just wanted to know if we can get, comment on where we can, comment. You could put that in the form of the. Yeah. Okay.
We'll get started in a couple minutes. Let everybody get in and thaw out.
I don't know, I have one down there when, it was great, but that one, so, figured out, because after the computers and put all of the methods, so.
But once now, just go get
Someone better.
On the other hand, when I'm trying to look at my the program. Video editing stuff. Yeah, if my last job, I still had one. Some stuff was so much easier. And we had a lot of great records we had to go through. So just had the whole computer and pull all the data out. The annoying now is how, it was on a whole system. Is now, they make it not use it. Or, you know, yeah. Everything from back. Yeah. Your equipment. Now. It's expensive. It's very unfair. Yeah, and for food. I'm all right. Ready? All right. How many people do we have online at this point? How many online so far?
25. 25. 26.
Oh, soon, you gotta do clear. Go up there to the pen, and then clear, and go down to clear, and clear all drops. There you go. And then you gotta X out that whole thing there, so you will X and get rid of that. Are there any other board members here? Oh, do you need to run out for a second? Yeah. All right, we'll start in about one more minute. Okay. Good evening. Evening. I think I recognize some of the folks from the meeting we had back in November. Thanks for coming back. We've been working very hard the last couple months, 3 months, and getting lots of information as well. And we wanted to do I know it's not all the same people as we had here last time. So we thought it would be important to start out with a little bit of background information first before we go into the updated plan that I think you'll all be excited to see, and we'll be able to reveal the, 864 plus responses to the survey, which is an amazing response level for a survey of this type in a community this size. I think we've got really good feedback from people. So let's see. All right, I keep forgetting down is up on this machine here. Right. All right, let me try it. It was working. This did this last time. I've checked everything and then it stops working. Yeah, it is. It is turned on. I probably hit something to screw it up. You want to just go to the next slide then? I'll keep playing with this. I should try it when I'm at it. We get it to work. Is it locked up? Maybe it's stuck. There you go. Now is it working? Go back one. So I'm Steve Pinkerton. I'm the general manager here at the CSD. We also have our board president here tonight, Bernice King Tingle. It's here as well. Bernice is one of the original inhabitants of this great community, right? Almost 20 years now, right? Yeah. 20 years later this year. And you're one of the last left from 2003, correct? in the air. Probably one of the last people still here from 2003 as well, I would think. Really? Mm-hmm. About 8 original owners. Mm-hmm. So thanks again for coming. And what we wanted to do tonight was talk a little bit about, again, background information about how we got here, and then go into the details of the updated plan. We got a lot of feedback last time that there was a lot of interaction in the room during the meeting that really made it hard for the rest of the people in the meeting to get information. There were a lot of interruptions along the way. And so, we've been doing these public meetings. I think I started doing public meetings about 1984. We're always trying to figure out the best way to make sure that folks are able to get their questions answered and folks are able to follow the presentation. So what we're going to do this evening, both online and in the room, is in the back corner over here, we have forms that you can put down any questions you have during the meeting, write those questions down, and then as we're getting towards the end of the meeting, go ahead and bring them right up here, and one of us will keep a hold of them, and then we will go through all the questions at the end of the presentation. And if people want to have more interaction than that, when we're done with the presentation, done with the questions, we're happy to stick around for any other additional dialogue back and forth. But we just found that when we allow a lot of dialogue back and forth during the meeting, it really interrupts the flow and it makes it hard for people to understand. In addition, for those of you who are on Zoom, if you have a question, put it in the chat and staff will translate it onto a piece of paper and make it a nice analog question. We figured we could spend 200 hours figuring out how to have them fill out a form online, or we could just manually take their question and put it on the form. So we thought that might be easier. So in any case, they're in the back of the room. There's pencils back there as well. So look forward to providing you with all this information, and looking forward to all of your questions. All right, let's see if it works here now. Is it locked again? And it's not even as big a PowerPoint this time. So what I wanted to do was go a little bit through the original master plan the master plan that got us here to today. For those of you who want a lot more background about how we got to this point, we did all right, it's moving. We did what we called a Mountain House 101 presentation back on January 25th. And if you go on our YouTube page, what's the name of our YouTube page? MHCSD Communications, I think. We've got all of our old public meetings on there. And if you go to about the 59-minute mark of the Mountain House 101, it gives you lots of detail about, I'll talk about some of that tonight, but if you want more information, there's a lot more in that presentation. And if you want to see the previous presentation that we did on this subject from November 16th, I think we have the audio version of that. And all of the old board meeting videos are always available on our website as well if you just go to our board of directors page. So is it still, let me see if it works there. It's still stuck. This is going to be a real pain. There we go. There we go. So the guiding plan for our Parks and Recreation is our Parks and Recreation plan. It was originally done about, they started doing the financing, figuring out the financing for the parks plan back in 1994, when they were first putting together what all the amenities were going to be in the community. And then in 1999, they kind of updated the costs for that. And then around 2002, 2003, as we were breaking ground on homes, they kind of finalized the initial cost for all of the amenities. And then that was slightly updated in 2011. And then in 2020, a little bit after I got here, I took a look at the plan. And the challenge with the plan is that it had never been really tested economically. They put in all these desired amenities that you'd want in a community, but they'd really never done a cash flow to see whether we could afford to build all these amenities and whether or not we could afford to maintain all of these amenities. And so we updated the plan to make sure that it was something that was achievable. And I'll talk about this a couple more times tonight, but the real challenge that we have in local government is the incredible cost increases we've experienced over the last 25 years, just massive price increases, and not the same requisite increases in our tax revenues that are coming in. And so you have to live within your means, and that makes things very challenging. And what happens in a lot of communities is they come up with these wonderful plans for community centers and giant sports fields and aquatic parks and all of these things. And we have a town about 5 miles from here that's a perfect example of having these great aspirations for all of the amenities they want. And they've been talking about this for about 20 years in these communities. And the problem is they never tied their desire for amenities to their ability to either pay to build these amenities or to maintain these amenities. And my goal in Mountain House and everywhere else that I've worked is let's actually come up with plans that are achievable and implementable, because I think it's a lot more fun for everybody in the community to enjoy the amenities instead of dreaming about the day they will somehow have an amenity. And so that was a big part of what we looked at when we updated and went through this, this 2-year process, 1.5-year process to update the plan. And we did have a lot of feedback from the public back then as well. We had 735 respondents that time versus 864 this time. So we had very good response back in 2020 as well. And you can see we had a very good response from the whole cross section of the community at the time. And then the board had several meetings where they went over their goals for what they wanted to see in the parks. This is kind of a COVID era whiteboard, which I thought was pretty cool how they were able to figure that out. You guys got that program yet? You figured out how to do that one? No, not yet. And then we kind of came up with our updated vision, which frankly wasn't a lot different than the original vision for the community, but with this crazy goal of actually wanting to have a plan that we could afford to implement. And we didn't change the basic hierarchy of, we have some basic types of parks. We have our community parks in the north, in the central, and in the south. We have our linear parks, which are along the creeks and the PG&E right-of-ways and things of that nature. And then we have our neighborhood parks. In certain places, we have what are called village parks and mini parks. And the reason those parks are included is in the original master plan, the requirement is that every resident had to be within a half mile of a park. So we made sure that the reason we've had to add parks such as in Cuesta and Bethany was so that everybody would be within. We better mute somebody here.
Thanks, Tori.
Can you mute all? Hit mute all down there. Oh, we can't? Never mind. Okay, my bad. Okay. You got it? All right. So I think now we went backwards again there. So anyway, so we had the village parks and the mini parks in some of the neighborhoods so that everybody in one way, shape, or form had, okay, is it locked now again? Yeah, it looks like it is. Maybe you just need to hit the cursor on the screen. If you click, there we go. I think when you go to elsewhere on the screen, it locks it. All right, on to let's see if I can get it now. Next slide. And so we came up with an updated vision for the parks in the community. We basically kept all of the same parks, although we did make some adjustments in the north part of the community, the North Byron area, as we call it, because originally there was going to be a private golf course through neighborhoods I and J, and that now thankfully is going to be a public green belt going through all of neighborhoods I and J. So it went from kind of a private commercial recreation to a public recreation. That was probably the biggest change. And then again, we got more realistic on what kind of things could be built along Old River and where we wanted to place our park. We originally had one neighborhood park in College Park, and we've made that 2 parks instead, one up next to Costa School and one over in the neighborhood just northwest of this park in what's called neighborhood A7, sort of at the past the end of Nazargoli along the PG&E right of way will be one additional park in neighborhood, what we call neighborhood A. College Park is technically almost two neighborhoods. And then we went through all the elements of the parks. And again, with some of the changes in community preferences over the last 20 years, you know, the cricket, badminton, pickleball, those weren't things people talked a lot about when they were developing this plan back in 1994. It was kind of all baseball fields all the time. And so now I think there's a more dynamic group of different elements that we're looking at in the different park areas. So let's slow this thing down. And again, and I know this is an issue. We tried to right size these parks so that we could afford to both build and maintain these parks. And I'll talk about that in a second as well. And we got into more detail about our trail corridors, because I think what we found, it was still less of a discussion kind of pre-2000. People didn't talk as much about integrated trail systems as they do nowadays. So we wanted to make sure that we want people to be able to transition from the PG&E right away to Mountain House Creek, and then some of the other walkways that we're going to have up north of Byron, so that we've got a much more better defined trail system for people to go throughout the community. So not just having activities within a park, but this ability to traverse walking or biking through the entire community. We went in a lot more detail about that and how you manage these trails and what kind of amenities you put on these trails as well. And we came up with a much clearer vision for our trails. And we put a specific map just for the trails as well. This all is much more detailed than what was in the original plans. And then we wanted to talk more, as I said, this was really the missing element in the 1994, 1999, and 2004 plan. They just assumed that it was kind of plug and play and pretty straightforward how we were going to pay and maintain for these properties. And again, I would recommend everybody to check out our January 25th PowerPoint. We go in a lot more detail about how Mountain House was created. But the bottom line is, when we were created, the county said, great, go ahead, build a community, but we, the county, are not going to share 1 penny of our taxes with you. If Mountain House is going to be built, 100% of the risk has to go on the developer, no risk on the county. And I talked about that a lot more in the last month. And so everything that gets built in this town has to be fronted by the developer. In a typical community, the developer will come in and they may build some of the amenities and they'll pay fees towards other amenities, and it'll be the city that may build the roads and the parks and things of that nature. But in Mountain House, it was structured with 100% of the responsibility on the development community. And then when they built that, they would then deed these, that whether it's a park or a sewer plant or a water plant or a road, all of those assets would then be turned over to the CSD. And then the CSD would write a little IOU and say, okay, as fees come in, we'll pay you back for the money that you spent on that the money that you spent to build that. And it was first come, first serve. Whoever built the first road, when more money comes in, they get paid, et cetera, et cetera. And there's one fund for utilities, there's one fund for roads, and there's one fund for parks that they get paid back on. And that all becomes a debt to the district. People are always saying, well, why is the district in debt? Well, you're building amenities that last 30 to 50 years. Nobody can afford to pay for those overnight. So as we build, every time we build any new asset, we have to pay back the builders for that debt, and that debt is paid back to the next people in the next neighborhood paying for that debt. But without debt, we can't have any of our assets built. If you wanted to, because you can't have pay as you go, because you have to be able to flush your toilets and drink the water and all those things up front. You can't wait till you've saved up for 30 years, because nobody can move in the house until the utility's there. So you have to have the utilities first before anybody moves in. So you have to have debt. I think it's stuck again. We got to click on it again. There we go. So all these parks, as I said, are paid through new development, first come, first serve. And then we have fees that are charged. So if you're in a medium density house, the home builder would have to pay $19,000 in his building permit fee to go towards paying towards park fees. You pay another $10,000 to $15,000 in transportation fees. You have some other transportation fees that they have to pay to the county. That's how all this works, is that we can't build any, once they front these things, we have to have more houses being built to pay for what's already, what debt's already been incurred. And over time, we adjust these fees to keep up with the changing construction costs. And then we have a plan of what each amenity costs, and we update that every 2 years. Now, the challenge we have with this is, as I said, the original cost estimates were done mid-90s to early 2000s. And public construction costs, the cost of building your typical park, has gone up sixfold during that time. Now, construction inflation has about doubled. The challenge we have is that all the additional requirements that are put on building something nowadays to code have gone up exponentially. Like, you look at this room, there has to be 2 doorways now instead of 1. There has to be this energy efficient lighting. There has to be carpet made out of a certain material that is not toxic. We have to have electric vehicle charging. We have to have carpool parking to take away parking in the parking lot. We have all sorts of other specific energy handicap. And not only do these things cost additional money, a lot of these things are much more expensive than the lights you would normally buy, much more expensive than what carpet used to be. So while inflation has doubled the cost, all the additional requirements have created 5- and 6-fold increases in the construction costs that we're dealing with nowadays. We had a bump in 2004. It flattened out, went down a little bit in 2010, and then it's just skyrocketed, in particular the last 4 or 5 years, a lot of the costs that we have. Plus, you just got general labor costs going up during that time. So the originally proposed 31-acre park would probably be about $40 million. And we have, in looking at what money we have coming in, we don't have nearly that amount. We've already quadrupled the parks fee over what it was in 2002. We'd have to probably put it up another 50 to 75% to even come close to the construction costs. And the problem is, there is a point where if the fees become too high, the home builders walk away. There's no, if you have to pay more in fees than what your profit would be on that house, your land value goes to zero. Nobody sells the land, nobody builds any houses, and the complete economic model of Mountain House collapses, because if we're not building more houses, then all this interest starts building up on our debt, and it becomes to where you can never, you know how it is if you have negative amortization, if nothing gets built for 3 years, you're just gonna be paying interest back. You'll never get into the principal that you own. So we were designed because the county said we had to be standalone, independent. If we don't consistently build homes, the whole thing collapses and we can't build anything. And so that's half of the battle, is just having enough money coming in to be able to build these parks. And I think we're already really pushing it, with quadrupling, we've quadrupled the budget for this park, but we had to cut back the costs a little bit. And frankly, the reason that houses are being proposed there is that the developer needs the money coming from those houses so that we have enough money to fund the park. And without those dollars, it's not a question of 22 acres versus 31 acres for this park. It's a question of, do you want to have a park that can be funded, or do you want just the lot as it is now with dirt? There's really not another alternative to make this work. Just the amenities in that neighborhood, the roads that came in that neighborhood, and a lot of the other amenities. 4 years ago, those were budgeted for the developer at about $50 million. It ended up costing about $70 million just to complete the roads. And so we're caught in a point where we have to be it's harder and harder to generate these fees because just the basic costs of building the subdivisions have gone up far in excess of our fees and inflation and everything else. So we've got a real challenge on the construction side. So we think we've come up with a really good method of making this project work by downsizing it to what we think makes the most sense economically. On top of that, it's not only is it a challenge, of course, to build a park, you have operational challenges too. I know everybody loves paying their special tax on their tax bill. And it has gone up, you know, with inflation, more or less with inflation since it was established back in 2003. The problem is our operational costs have probably gone up at twice the rate of the special tax. Right now, the special tax that's set aside for parks maintenance generates less than $1 million a year. And our cost of parks maintenance is at about $4 million a year right now. So we're already way upside down and having to look at other sources to do that. For our police officers, the special tax for police maybe covers 2/3 of their cost. So a lot of things that may have made sense in the year 2000 economics do not make sense in the year 2023 economics. And so it's my job, and the board has made it clear to me, we have to have a fiscally sustainable community and maximize the amenities of the community at the same time. And so this is the tension that we go through. We have to be realistic about the fact that we've only got so many resources. And I think the other challenge, and I went through this when I was a city manager in another community during the last recession, it's difficult to make things work out here in the Valley economically it's hard to compare us to the Bay Area and say, well, you know, they did that in Dublin, they did that in Pleasanton, they did that in Livermore. Why can't we do it in Mountain House or Manteca or any cities out here in the Valley? Well, here's the challenge. We probably have the same, it costs as much to build and operate something in Dublin as it does in Mountain House. The difference is, and it's the reason a lot of you are here, the difference is that they're generating twice as much property tax out of that house in Dublin as they are in Mountain House many times. You know, it's higher property values. So that's part of the factor. But the even bigger factor in a place like Pleasanton and Livermore and Dublin is they have all those stores generating all that sales tax. They have Oracle and all these other companies paying business license taxes and a lot of the commercial folks pay a lot of property tax. And so we actually generate right now per capita from your taxes, we generate pretty much good for the Valley, which works out to about $850, our general fund works out to about $850 per person. Tracy, because they've now got the Amazon warehouses that actually generate a lot of sales tax for them. They're the king of the Valley now at 1,000. You know, Lathrop is up towards 1,000 now too, but that money's not coming from the neighborhoods. That money's coming from the Amazon warehouses and some of the other, and the Tesla and everything else they have in those communities. We don't have those big giant lots to generate those types of things. And while they generate more revenue, they've got a lot more roads that get the heck torn out of them too. So they need more revenue, because I'm not always convinced these warehouses really pay for themselves, but I'll save that for another discussion. But the bottom line is, when it comes to things like park funding, we're at $850 per capita. Pleasanton is at about $1,800 per capita. Livermore and Dublin are at about $1,500 per capita. So that gives you a lot more money for your community amenities. Frankly, out here in the Valley, a lot of the cities are just struggling to pay their fire and police officers, which is why they've been talking about the Tracy Aquatic Center since 2003, which they've been talking about their intergenerational community facility for just as long. They've raised their sales tax to pay for it, so that they're paying higher sales tax, and it's still not enough. And we're never going to have a lot of sales tax in this community. You know, we'll have a shopping center or two, but, you know, a grocery store generates less, because most things in a grocery store don't generate sales tax. The gas station generates more sales tax than the Safeway grocery store. A lot of your warehouses, if they're not Amazon, you know, the Unifab over here, they don't generate any sales tax. So even when we become a city and we start getting our share of the sales tax, we're still going to generate income more like a bedroom community than a big commercial community. And we're never going to have the revenues available of a Pleasanton, Dublin, Livermore, you name it, on the other side of the hill. So we've got to live within our means here. And so we've worked very hard, worked very closely with our board to say, we want all these amenities. how can we pay for it? Because I don't think the board wants to double your special tax. They can't do that, by the way. They can only go up. Yes, so we think living within our means, we're trying to come forward to you with the best possible project. So I'm happy to talk to anybody now or at any other time after this meeting. They want to learn more about the economics of Mountain House, but this evening, I wanted to turn it over to Amy Couples, our architect, to talk about the specifics of this project. If you want to talk about the 22 versus 31, this isn't the time to do it. Be happy to have another discussion. You know, I've reached out and said, anybody wants to talk to me, they can. No one's reached out to me at this point. So that's why I just gave you 10 minutes of Mountain House Economics 101. But for the rest of the evening, I would appreciate if we could just, again, questions in writing, and if we could focus the questions on the actual park. But I'm happy to have discussions about the acreage later. So I'm gonna turn it over to Amy now.
Well, thank you all for coming again. As Steve said, I also recognize some of you from the previous meeting. And thank you very much for all your participation in the online survey. We got great results, and I've never seen such high community participation in any of our surveys like this. So that's exciting. I'm Amy Couples from Couples Keller Design. We were hired in the late summer to start the process of thinking through the concept design for this park. And we're still very much in concept design. So this is, again, a process of gathering information from you all so that we can massage this design into something that will be representative of the community and what they want and need. Let's see if I can do this. Okay, so this one, Steve already talked to. The park is in the south. That's the name, South Community Park. It is 22, 24 acres, depending upon exactly where it is, but that is approximately that property line. And it is part of the whole park and trail system. So it is interconnected to the rest of Mountain House. And again, that one shows it in context with the college to the west, Evelyn Costa Elementary School to the northeast, and the neighborhoods surrounding it. One of the issues that we have, issues and pluses, is that we have the easements that run through the park. And those are PG&E easements, and they prohibit structures of any kind. That includes fence posts and light posts and even soccer goals. But you can have trails. So these are part of taking advantage of those easements, and that's where the trail system goes and connects into the larger trail system of Mountain House. As well connects to the trail system, the walkway system within the park itself. As I hope most of you know, and I hope most of you participated, there was this Mountain House survey. We got a total of 864 responses, which is a huge percentage. That's excellent. So thank you for being such an invested community. And we were specifically focusing on South Community Park in this survey. So the Parks and Leisure Plan that was approved back in 2021, this is coming out of that as part of the following up on those surveys that were done for that and that Parks Plan that was approved. And then now we're looking specifically at South Community Park. So we're going to get into stuff. There we go. Okay. So we're going to get into the responses specifically and just have a quick discussion on who responded and what you all said. College Park had the most responses, about 1/3 of the responses. Well, 1/4 to 1/3. Most of the people have school age kids, so 6 to 12 elementary school kids. And sort of midlife raising kids, families. Most of the respondents were male and Asian Indian. So it's very similar to what you saw for the Parks and Leisure Plan. See, I'm gonna have to turn around, excuse me. For fun and physical activity, most people enjoy walking, jogging, just being outside, probably playing with kids. And getting together with friends and family. Getting together with people seemed to be a common theme throughout the whole survey. And you'll see on the left-hand side of all these slides, it is the overall respondents. On the right-hand side is the College Park specific respondents. So what you'll notice, they're very similar. So the community really is has sort of a lot of commonality and common feelings. Wind protection came up a lot, which is very obvious. The strong afternoon winds, especially as it whips through the valley. That will be one of the focuses in the design of not just the dappled shade and the shade protection for the picnic tables and whatnot, but also how do we protect some of that wind coming in from the west. And we asked about dogs. People were generally in agreement that dogs are okay, but they need to be in their dedicated space and don't want them running rampant through the park. Then we talked about recreation. What do people do? What do you like to do? What don't you like to do? And what's important to you? So the 4 that I highlighted are badminton, green open space, multi-purpose sports fields, and cricket is kind of, a lot of people like it or they don't like it. It's kind of a mixed bag. We also asked about 8 more. Picnicking, playground and walking and jogging trails were far and away the most important things to anyone in the community. So those are high priorities. And tennis courts. And then you can see this in terms of when you were asked to rank your choices, what were the top things, the top 5 items that you wanted? Again, all the respondents are on the left and community parks specifically on the right. Walking, jogging trails, everybody wants. Everybody wants to be able to get out, walk with friends, walk with family. Picnic and playground are number 2 and 3, depending upon what you are, College Park or overall community, but both of them high priorities. And then the others kind of fall down as you go through the list. Rugby, basically nobody's interested in it. And baseball and softball, again, which Steve mentioned earlier, that was a top priority back in '94. It was the thing that you would put in a park. Now, basically, the community is a very different community than it was originally discussed with, and so there are different priorities. This question was about what do you personally like to do? What do you engage in for field sports? The top line is I never do it. So you'll see most of them, baseball, softball, rugby, lacrosse. Those are people basically never engage. Frisbee, kind of a mixed bag. Soccer, more people engage. And cricket, again, there's a whole group of people who never engage, and then there's a group who are on an active team. Now we get into the more interesting slides. These are the ones that talk about what would you like to see at the park, what kind of design elements. If you're going to engage in some of the park horse elements on your walking, jogging circuit, would you stop and do some pull-ups or a balance beam or maybe some sit-ups? So these elements, the ones that are highlighted in the red, those are the top 4 that came out consistent both between College Park and all of the respondents. So it sounds, especially option 4 with the guy climbing over the wall, that's a pretty challenging park horse element. Then there's the balance beam and some leg exercises. For kids, what would the kids like to see in their playgrounds? And how, what would you what would excite you about coming to a park? And how can we get you to come, bring your kids to a park more often? Well, number one, more places to play. So just more opportunities. And as Steve explained, that's in process. There's the building process of all the different varieties of parks, not just these community parks, but the smaller parks, the pocket parks, and the other sort of the hierarchy of parks that you mentioned. Nature experiences, so trails, playgrounds that have stumps or tree limbs, or maybe some dirt and sand and water, or some gardens to engage in. And then some other creative places that sort of inspire imagination, imaginative play, and some undefined but safe play spaces. Actual elements, we showed a few pictures. The option 2, so that owl, that one was a highly rated one. The ropes portion, option 6, that allows for a lot of kids of different abilities and different ages to engage in it, test their limits of how high up they can get, test their parents' limits of their stress when they see them climbing. Option 4 is a little bit more of a traditional post and platform, but it has some of those challenging elements as well, like a rope going from one tower to the next. And a lot of that can be imaginative as well, so that it can suggest some type of play, but it really allows for a little bit of hide and seek with the parents, or challenging time with friends, or tag, or hot lava. Hot lava game's the best. So then the questions we asked were about gathering. What would you do, and how would you use some of those gathering spaces in a park? Would you get together alone on a weekday with maybe one friend or coworker? Would you bring your family? Would you get together with a group of friends? Would you arrange and schedule an event? Would you have a larger event, or just a casual get together, picnic and barbecue? And the top responses were spend the day with friends and family, reserve a spot, so I know I have a spot, and just visit, get to the park, go to the park, relax, walk together. And then there was some community engagement, but not the top 3 were more casual. And then how would you use those gathering spaces? Maybe a weekday visit in the afternoon after school, something like that. Get together on the weekend with several tables, and again, a casual day at the park. Our last question was really trying to explore what you imagine as you're raising your kids here at Mountain House. What would you imagine for the park over time as it's built out and you're hanging out with friends? And repeatedly, the word community comes up. Families, kids, a great place, the best place, wonderful place. There was definitely a lot of pride in Mountain House and in this park, and wanting it to be a place for all. So providing kids spaces, sports spaces, places for people to walk around, places for people to just engage in a green open space. So really a lot of variety depending upon what you want. You want some quiet time, if you want some fun, active time. And these were a few of the comments that we saw from the respondents. And you'll see again in these, the word community pops out over and over and over again. A place for all, a place for kids, a place for seniors, a place for adults, sports, and quiet time. So we took these responses and we reviewed them, and we looked at our previous plan and said, okay, we need to tweak some things. We didn't quite get it right last time. Let's massage it and see how we can change it. And so this is a draft recommended conceptual plan, but again, it's a draft. So we're looking for comments and thoughts from you all. And what we've done, and also taking into account the easements and the issues with Crimson and PG&E, not being able to put any structures up in there, we've pulled all of the elements out of that easement area so that we don't have any worries about fences or light posts or things in those areas. pulled them all down toward the south, and playground was a top priority, remember? So we moved playground, which is number 5, into right by the main parking lot, wedged in, but the main parking lot and the main larger multi-purpose sports fields, so that that playground could be part of phase 1. That way, in phase 1, I'll move to the next slide. In phase 1, phase 1 is phase 1A, which is more immediate, and phase 1B. So phase 1A is the multi-purpose sports field. Large, undefined sports field, but it is big enough for, say, 2 soccer fields or a cricket field. Could be a game of lacrosse. It could be just simple, a pickup game midweek. Team practice, something like that. There would be some street parking, there'd be a restroom, bike lockers. That would be the earliest phase. Phase 1B, following right on the heels of 1A, would be a playground. More parking, some picnic areas adjacent to that playground, some large open green space, that's number 8, and then a circular walking path, which goes from Central Parkway down the core of the park, and then back up around the fields and around the north side of the trails. That's about a half-mile loop. So you could get already a decent run in there while your child is running around on the soccer field. Phase 2 would be the build out of the park. So that would have the sports courts down at the southern edge, which do include tennis court as an option that fits in there. Basketball courts fit in there, badminton, volleyball, all of those fit in there. We've put in a potential of 5 courts right now, and those could all be a variety of multi-purpose sports courts. So they could be striped for various different games and allow for lots of different play types. And then more bathrooms, a dog park, even though it's a low priority, is still something that people wanted. So that would be in as part of the last of phase 2. More fields at the back side, on the east side of the park. Those fields would be, again, just grass fields, natural grass fields. So you have both the synthetic turf option and then the natural grass fields. And those natural grass fields big enough for some larger games to be played there, as well as some pickup games. And this is the overall planning out of the phases. Notice we have restrooms and open space and walking, jogging trails in all of the different phases, so that it's not just left to the end. There is a little bit added in each phase. The overall walking, jogging trail going around the park is about 1 mile in length. So that, combined with the park course elements, if you are really into exercise in that form, you can get a pretty good workout. And then the park circulation system. So this is just adding on top of that walking, jogging trail system. You can see in the blues and the greens, that's sort of the overall loop pattern. And these are the sections of what it looks like. Sorry, they're a little bit pale to read, but the ones in the top left and the center column, those are the main trails, and they are substantial trails. They're 8 to 10 feet wide. And even the largest one is on the top, the class 1 shared bike path and walking path that has dedicated bike lanes, dedicated pedestrian lanes. So there is that separation. It's about 20 feet wide. And then lots of shade trees. So combined with the wind protection, which would be some screening trees, we'd also have shade trees. So you have plenty of trees to help provide sun protection and wind protection. And then we would carefully place some of those bathrooms also to help with some of that wind protection. As well as some structured covers over, picnic areas. And then lots of low maintenance, easy to maintain shrubs, and then plenty of lawn areas for gathering. Next, do you want to talk about any next steps after this, Steve? So the design process is, this is a draft recommended concept plan. So, hopefully we'll get some comments and feedback from you all tonight, both on Zoom and here in person. And again, we do have the papers that people can write down questions or comments, and we can provide feedback directly to some questions and take all that information in and modify it again. And then after that, the next steps are that we do a final recommended plan, hopefully. And once we do a final recommended plan, that plan can get approved ideally by the board, and then we can move into actual design for the specific phase 1A and phase 1B projects so that we can ultimately begin construction.
Yeah, the goal is get this level of planning finalized. We get all the input, they finalize it with all the comments from the community. Then it goes back to the board for final review. And then, as we're going through the budget process, we see whether or not we've got, we've got these other pieces that need to be put in place for the funding, the rezone of the parcel, because that funding's critical to get the first phase built. And then once those puzzle pieces on the funding is in place, then we can see what the timing would be on whether we do just 1A or we do 1A and 1B right away. A lot of it is dependent on where construction costs are as well. And I don't think you talked about cost much at this point for the phases, did you? But
No, we've been shifting the design around so much. We're trying to get it settled down. We had an overall cost, back on one of the earlier slides, about 30 million, I think is what our target is right now. And as we go through the design, what happens in each phase will affect the individual phase costs. And the construction costs are going up and down a lot right now as well. So as we get closer and keep refining, we'll keep doing cost estimates so that we have a better idea of where we land on the price.
yeah, as we move forward, as it would come to the board later this year, we'll be through this summer's construction season, so we can at least get a little bit of idea whether the market has flattened out as much as people claimed it has. The problem is with anything we do in government is more of a specialty construction. So it's hard to say whether or not, even though overall construction inflation is flat right now, we're not certain it's going to be flat for us. So those are just things we continually monitor. The goal is to do as many phases as we can at once, because every time you have to remobilize, obviously it's more cost. So we just have to see where the numbers come in and then see how much money we have available. What we thought was crucial, step one we really can't do phasing till we know what the different elements are going to be. So once we get this process done this summer, then, or hopefully by summer, we'll then be able to get more into it, becomes more of a financial issue at that point. But first and foremost, we want to make sure that that we've got all the elements that the community's interested in. So it's important. All that feedback we just got online was very important, but it's very important to hear from people as well. So please, if you have any questions at all, or just want to give us feedback, we've got the forms back by Don in the back of the room there. We wanted to get all the feedback. I don't know, did we get any questions yet, Catherine, from the Zoom? You can just bring them to me if you want at this point. All right,
I think this was more of a comment.
okay. All right, so the first comment was they're hoping in phase 1B to have a gathering place with weather protection or gazebo, to help bring, rental income in that area. We know there's we certainly have gotten a lot of feedback when it comes to weather protection. That's why she mentioned, like with the tennis courts in the Central Park, we're looking at putting the restrooms. You want to have your big things with a wall as far westerly in the park as possible, right? Yeah. And do you have any ideas of what you've done other places to deal with wind as well? Because we can't turn off the windmills. That's not going to help. Right? So,
Multiple tree rows, layers of trees, buildings. Buildings are the best tree, wind protection. We can't do a solid row of buildings though, so it's a combination of where you locate the building, always locate it to the west of the element that you're protecting, in our case here. So that would be the restrooms to the west of the tennis courts or the sports courts, the restrooms to the west of the playground and so forth. And then layers of trees so that you can get sort of a pushing that wind up as high as we can rather than letting it whip through the park. Yeah, there are some that are like lean-to shade structures that we can put one wall on one of them. And then, of course, it comes down to security and how, an oversight for that. So we don't want to completely block off all the views. So there's a balance that you have to play between, allowing views, which allows winds, and then blocking off and protecting.
all right, next question is more of a technical question about with some of the downsizing, are we still meeting the green space requirements and what is the legal requirement? Well, there's really not, first of all, I think overall, if the latest parks plan does get into total acreage, and typically the way you look at what are the best standards is acreage per 1,000 residents. And I think we're still well above the standards for acre per 1,000 residents. And frankly, the original study included the golf course in their green space calculations, even though the golf course was not open to the public. It was a private golf course. So I think in reality, I think we actually have more public open space now than we did in the original 1994 plan. Because if you look at any of these maps, you can see there's a significant amount of open space now in the north part of the community that there was not there before. And, some people are asking, could we have a park entry fee? And I can tell you that works nowhere. I think the only way, the only mechanism that typically happens for some parks is when you put an assessment on the surrounding owners. And a lot of you who live in College Park either have or are about to get an assessment, because the way the original financial model worked is the neighborhood parks and the community parks, the standard was those would be paid for out of general tax revenues, but the open space areas, the linear open space areas, the non-community parks, those would be put, and the mini parks would all be put in assessment districts and paid for by the surrounding residents. And so there's always that model that if the people in the neighborhood wanted to assess themselves $10 or $15 million for the full additional 9 acres and wanted to assess themselves another $500,000 a year in assessments to maintain that, you could do that. But given Mountain House's tax rates already, I don't think a lot of people would be wanting to add $4,000 or $5,000 a year to their tax bill to maintain that. And I don't think people outside the South community area would want to do that as well. And I think it's important to note that some of the amenities that people desire, the Central Community Park, which a lot of people in this town have been waiting for the expansion since 2007. We're going to have a full tennis complex. We're going to have a Little League complex. We're going to have 2 very large sports fields. Right next door is going to be an indoor recreational facility built in several places with a play pool and a swimming pool. But there was never money budgeted for swimming at all. In fact, the developers have pushed back on any funds going towards swimming. And some of the plans, they talked about pools as being optional, but there were never, I don't think the financing plan ever included the swimming pools, because the developers know that the most expensive thing to maintain is a swimming pool. So we've set aside other dollars to make sure that we can have a swimming pool complex within the community. But I think I don't think it's realistic to think that one neighborhood would want to take on the burden for this park because as I said, the costs are extraordinary. And so what we're trying to do is what we think is affordable to all. I mean, in reality, I think most assessments only pass when there's one voter and that's the developer. If you're to try to put that in after the fact, which I've had to do in other communities, it's very difficult. So why no swimming pool? There was no swimming pool in the original plan for here. There was an alternative for a swimming pool that was put in the plan, but there was, like I said, there was never any, we're going to have a swimming pool in any of the neighborhoods. So, I mean, and swimming pools are very expensive. And that's why we're focusing it in one centrally located within the community. I don't want to pick on Tracy too much, but I will. You've got 100,000 people in Tracy. Who knows how many swimming pools they have in Tracy? One. And how long have they been talking about their aquatic center? 20 years. And in fact, that aquatic center that started out at $40 million, when they repriced it 4 years ago, was $130 million. Now they've cut it back to $65 million. And I don't think there's been a discussion of whether it's going to get built for another couple of years. So our goal is to right size something so we can get it built. I managed one community where we had 3 older pools that were all about to fall apart. I mean, if you're going to build a pool, I think the real goal for us is if we're going to build something in this community, we want to make sure that we can actually afford to maintain it. Because I've worked in other communities where I've inherited these issues, and it was hard to even go out at night because I would be so stressed out figuring out how the heck are we going to pay for all of this deferred maintenance that we've got, not just on our roads, but all these old buildings and everything else that have been built. So we want to make sure that 20 years from now, we're not in here. I'm not sure I'll be in here, but probably a lot of you will be, in saying, you know, we don't have the money to continue to maintain this. Which one of these buildings is going to get closed? We'd rather have, for a community center, one large cost-effective center, you know, where you have one front counter, not 3 front counters, one staff to maintain the building, those types of things. You just, as I said, we can't afford that out in the valley. Even in Dublin and areas like that with twice our revenue are having trouble keeping up with those types of amenities. Can we add the playground to phase 1? Is the next comment. South Park is defined as a sports hub. However, there are plans to have tennis, softball, and swimming in Central. Does that make sense to split those? And would it make better financial sense to keep high maintenance facilities at Central and designate South as just outdoor adventure play destination? Well, I think the challenge we have is that I think just having for your sports fields, just having those sports fields in Central Park is not going to be enough to meet all of the demand of a community that will be 50,000 people in 15 years. And so that's why we've planned to have certain amount of sports fields at all 3 community parks, because we do need to take some of the pressure off the fields. A lot of these neighborhood parks were never designed for the amount of activity that they get now. So, you know, there are certain things of certain demand that make sense to concentrate in Central Park, but there are certain amenities that we really need to have throughout the community, just because, as you know, 1 to 2 sports fields doesn't come close to meeting the demand for all the users in the community. College Park homes were sold way higher than originally estimated. Did CSD get any benefit of this sale? Well, as I said, the builder also had $20 million additional dollars. The master developer had $20 million additional dollars in costs. Now, I'm sure Century Homes made a little bit extra money on that, but the special tax that we receive has nothing to do with what the home price is sold for. On your property tax, we get 15 cents of that $1 property tax. So if those houses sold for 100,000 more than originally anticipated, we get $150 a year more from those houses. We get very little of our revenue out of property tax, we get most of our money out of the special tax, which is based, as you know, on acreage and square footage. And in fact, on those smaller, a lot of those smaller homes in Central Park, we actually get less per home than we do in the neighborhoods with the larger lots, just the way the fee is set up. So we probably are getting a little higher property tax than we anticipated, but property tax is only about 30% of our general fund. Hopefully it'll be a little bit more in the future. But again, the real challenges are, you know, things like that detention basin with the ghost bike at the corner, that costs a lot of money. Widening Grant Line Road cost a lot more than we anticipated. Central Parkway cost a lot more than anticipated. Putting in all those portals cost a lot more than anticipated. Putting in those little walkways that connect from the cul-de-sacs back to Central Parkway cost a lot more money. Our wastewater plant, which originally we thought 5 years ago would be $35 million, ended up at $61 million. There's just so many additional costs that go into these things along with the added maintenance costs. That's the real challenge that we have. And so we're just trying to stay within the taxes that you pay. That's the goal. I mean, from the day I walked into this community, I don't think a day has gone by without the word special tax being uttered to me in one way, shape, or form. I think folks are very sensitive to that. I'm very sensitive. I'm very sensitive to the utility bills and the challenge that we have with the utility bills, because you have that additional charge on your utility bill that pays for the actual construction of all of those facilities. So we do have some high taxes to pay here in Mountain House. So I'm trying to make it where we can stay within the means of those taxes. Again, if you watch that video from a month ago, you'll see the fact that we do get a lot less property tax than other communities, because the county told the developer, you don't get to build Mountain House unless you pay your own way. And we, the county, are broke. The state took away a lot of our property tax, so you can't take our property tax too. So we do get in less revenue out of the property tax, and we have to make that up with the special tax. And there are all these other challenges, because it's not just construction costs are going up. I'm sure you just saw your garbage charge on your utility bill, and we don't have a lot of control. The state has put in new requirements, and every utility bill in the state's gone up 30 to 40% over the last year. So we're trying to make sure that we don't add to that burden of things that we're stuck doing no matter what. How do we know the survey is done by taxpayers? Well, there is no guaranteed way, but we do have about half of the folks who were registered, and we looked at the difference between those who are registered and not registered, and frankly, there wasn't much difference between the two. And it does make it where I don't think you can do more than one or two from any one IP address. So I think that based on the fact that those who have registered and are confirmed as registered survey takers, that their feedback isn't different than the unregistered, I think we got pretty good feedback on the survey. And it's a much more effective means than the same survey. If we wanted to make sure every single person was legit, we'd have to pay $20,000 or $30,000. So for basic, we have a base cost. We can do these surveys all year long. And I've used this same survey tool in other communities where we did cross-check, and we did see whether or not we were getting similar feedback from these open town hall surveys that we got from the scientific surveys, and they were virtually the same. So why spend $10,000 a survey when we can do it simple this way? So I can't remember founder. So the next question. I'm gonna break down and wear glasses one of these days. So they're saying, how come it's a smaller community getting a smaller community park? Well, North Community Park, the North area is much larger than the three neighborhoods that this park serves. So this is consistent with the typical size of a community park. We have two 20+ acre parks, one in the north, one in the south. If you look, for example, at the Tracy Parks Master Plan, you look at what Amy's worked at other places, your typical community park is 15 to 20 acres. We've made it a little bit bigger because we've incorporated the sports fields in here as well. Because you have lots of communities that say 15-acre community park plus sports fields, and then what happens is typically the sports fields never get built, and you ended up using the community parks for the sports fields. So we might as well make the parks large enough for the sports fields to start out with. And let's see, need indoor badminton courts instead of swimming pool. Well, one of the things we'll be doing is we're going to be having additional community meetings on what uses how we want to design. I point this way because it's going to be right next door here. The indoor community center is going to be right next door to this building, and it's going to be very flexible space. And so that's one of the reasons you want one large center versus multiple small centers, because you have a lot more flexibility for doing things if you have 3 gyms each a mile apart, 2 miles apart, you can't do the same thing as having 2 to 3 gyms connected to each other. So, but we will hopefully have meetings in the next year. I mean, we're trying to, again, just like with this park, we're trying to expedite the construction, because just like you, I feel like when we're at 30,000 people, we're way overdue for a indoor facility. How is this park different from North and Central Park? I think the North Park will probably have pickleball instead of tennis. May not have as many play fields, but you can see in the plan, there's a different range of opportunities in each park. You know, their sports fields may be designed a little bit differently. There's subtle differences between the park. That one's tied in to a large open space as well, but it's all outlined in the parks plan that you can get online, the differences, and we'll certainly have design meetings on that park, but that park's probably 5 to 7 years away, because we want to, our short-term goal is to continue the expansion of Central Park, hopefully all of it, but that's about a $70 million cost. So we're trying to figure out some ways to expedite that and at least get the first phase of this park constructed as well. But remember, we've still got what do you think, Jerry, about over half the homes still to build in College Park. And so we need the revenue from those homes to keep coming in so that we have both the capital and the operating expenses to get that done. And we are hopefully going to be working on the design of both neighborhood parks over the next year as well. The challenge we have in College Park is it's not owned. Jerry here doesn't own all the property. There's 3 or 4 other key property owners, and some of them have not sold their land yet. But I am trying to find a way to expedite the park adjacent to Costa School. So we're having some arm wrestling with the property owner right now on that. Let's see. Okay, this person again wants to say they want to figure out a way to keep the 9 acres. That was their second question. How much additional park fee will the unplanned houses generate? It's not really the park fee they generate, it's the capital from the land sale they generate that's going to help make up the 20 million cost overage for everything else. The park fee would probably from those houses would generate a little over $1 million. But all in all, it probably will make about a $10 million difference to getting the first phase of this project funded. I'm glad somebody asked that. Any plans for tennis courts? So we did put one tennis court facility along with all the sports fields and the sports courts in this area. The goal is to have a large tennis center in Central Park that would be managed on a daily basis, you know, for those who want to have lessons and things like that. And then to have 1 or 2 courts in the other community park for people who don't want to go through the whole work of having to go into the managed facility. But we have to have one large managed facility because this community has amazing demand for tennis courts, which you probably know. So we've got to, and we are, as you know, also working with the high school to try to use their tennis courts on off hours as well. And we are trying again this summer to use the swimming pool. So any of you want a lifeguard this summer, we're ready for you. Talk to Laura in the back of the room, our new recreation manager, who I should have introduced, but she needs what do you need? About a dozen lifeguards at least. It was frustrating last summer. We had 2 people apply. We did all sorts of outreach. And then in the middle of the summer, it's amazing how many Facebook posts for all these people who claim they would have applied for the job. And we don't want that to happen again. We only get about 7 weeks in the pool, but until we get a pool built, we really want to take advantage of that. But we can tell you that every community is really impacted on lifeguards, even the communities where they already have a pool and they've had swim programs for 10 years. So you have a pipeline of kids. even those folks are having a hard time getting lifeguards. You know, you lost a couple of years with COVID, and Great Wolf Lodge actually stealing a lot of lifeguards as well, because they pay really well and they have a lot more hours and you can work there year round. For us, when you're offering 7 weeks employment, it's a real challenge. So one person asked about security. Yeah, I mean, we will have good security in every one of our parks to make sure that we can monitor them 24/7. What proportion of the allocation how many kids play areas are there? Again, just to review in the park.
It's a very large kids play area with 3 or 4, well, it's not officially designed yet, I should say that. But it's got 3 or 4 different areas within that phase 1 for a variety of ages from, well, 2 to 12. And then the park course elements kind of start taking over after 12 years old. So all of that phase 1, it's all in the phase 1 area though.
So, and then the running track is what, about a mile, you said?
The full track all the way around the park is about a mile. The phase 1 part of it is about a half mile.
And we saw that as one of the highest demand. And that's one of those things we really learned from the survey, how much demand there is for that. Not when we expected, that's now incorporated. What's happening with the proposed apartments? The apartment, there's a 338 unit building across from where Central Parkway dead ends on the freeway side. There's 338 units that the county approved, I think in September. I've lost track of which project was when. They're working through their designs right now and they expect to break ground later this year. Again, it's similar to the project up here. You know, apartment projects nowadays, you're talking 2,500 to 3,000 a month rent. These are market rate apartments with their own amenities. Is there an option for us to convince you to change back to the original plan? As I said, I see a phone number here. I will give you a call. See if we can talk about this some more. Lighting in the playground area. You can address Igor right here.
Definitely. Lighting will be as we get more in depth in the discussion of the design. There will be some more about lighting, but absolutely there'll be a base level of security and lighting for the park. Obviously, there'll be sports lighting, there'll be playground lighting, there'll be parking lot lighting, and then some moderate path lighting as well, so that in the evenings, activities can still happen there, especially if you're driving home from work and it's dark out already.
And you do photometric studies and everything, right?
Yeah. So as part of the process of design, one of the studies that we always do is a photometric study, which basically analyzes the amount of light over every square footage of the park. And you don't want to have it spilling into the neighborhoods as much as possible. You want to keep it within the park, but you want to make sure that you can see within the park. So there aren't any extra bright spots. There aren't any extra dark spots, and sort of an even level of light and focused on the elements and not necessarily just the open green spaces.
And we have to be sensitive to the fact that this park is designed with houses around it and on 2 sides. So when we're designing this, we want to have the light shine as directly down. So we're not going to get as much overlap, but for the people who live adjacent to the park, this is going to be a very busy place from, particularly on weekends, from sunrise to sunset and beyond. And so we want to mitigate that, but at the same time, it's a community park. And so unlike neighborhood parks purposefully don't have lighting because, deep in the neighborhoods, you don't want people out playing basketball at 11 o'clock at night. So, but on the community park, these are the parks where you're going to have more late night activity. That's just the harsh reality of things being.
Tournament happening that, is in the fall after it starts getting dark in the evenings early. So that the sports fields will be lit, the parking lots will be lit, and as will the playground, so that those extra family members have something to do as well.
And then he asked about gazebo, more shade structure would be great to have in the summer.
Yeah, and that will all be worked out in more definition as we get further into the design. But definitely planning for some shade structures, some gathering spaces with tables and with general seating areas and things like that.
So
And-
next, go ahead.
Seating areas.
So we get this question a lot, and this is about restroom facilities in the older neighborhood parks, you know, Bethany, Wickland, Altamont. And the original plan was that because everybody's within 5 minutes of a park, they shouldn't need a restroom. But I also know the people in the early 90s who put this in the plan, and I know she had just had her kids, so she didn't yet have the experience of having her kids a half mile away from home. So we did look into that. The board had a lot of discussion about whether or not we should add back in restroom facilities. It's always more expensive to retrofit to add restrooms in. You know, you've got a lot of utility lines you have to deal with to bring them in. And when the budget came in at about $500,000 a park, the decision was made not to budget those original parks, but you know, to continue to work with the sports teams to try to keep those temporary facilities. I can tell you as one who walks out a lot at night, I rather would go frankly into those temporary restroom facility, the porta potties, than I do an actual bathroom. They're actually a lot easier to, you know, restrooms are just very difficult to maintain. So the decision was made not to spend the $500,000 plus maintenance cost for each one of those parks. But one was put in Hanson, as you know, and then when they were changing the policy, and then one was put in Cordes primarily because it was right next to tennis courts and the high school. But in the other neighborhood parks, it's still up in the air, depending on where construction costs are, whether any of the neighborhood parks, future neighborhood parks are going to have restrooms. Like I said, it's a big, big cost. And if there's porta potties or other restrooms nearby, you don't want to overbuild these restrooms. They're very expensive to maintain. Can we have a sustainable model for the swimming pool? Well, I've had this discussion for 30 years, and there is no such thing as a lap pool does not sustain it used to be that the play pools, you know, just the splash area pools, they come closer to maintaining if they're indoors, which triples the cost. But the reason that Great Wolf Lodge spends you pay $300 to $400 a night for the room is that those water parks do not pay for themselves. Even in Florida, your pools close for half of the year, and with today's construction costs, virtually none of those would be built, is the challenge. But swimming pools are expensive, and the school districts, you know, that's why you don't see multiple pools at the school districts either. When I was in Manteca, the high school, the superintendent was begging me to take over his pools every time I met with them because there's such a drain on their costs. In fact, I think the first couple of years Lathrop High School was open, they had maybe 5 kids try out for the swim team. But I think it's more now, but they really struggled with, why did we spend all this money on a pool? So how is the park different from North and Central Park? I think, again, Central Park has a lot more centralized facilities in the indoor facilities. You know, North is senior, South is more playfields. And then another one wants to retain the 9 acres. And then another one asked, I already answered about, you know, what revenue would be generated from the houses. So the number is basically 10 million plus the additional ongoing revenue we would receive. So when Mountain has incorporated any positive cash flow, well, hopefully. I mean, that's one of the reasons. I mean, there's a lot of reasons to incorporate, and certainly if you're not incorporated, you don't get sales tax, you don't get business license tax, you don't get hotel tax. And frankly, as we get to be a larger city and I keep looking at the sheriff in the back, we're going to have to hire more officers, and that's where most of that money is going to go. That's always the tension, is we want to make sure we have enough money left for parks, that all the money doesn't go into public safety. So we try to find a balance between the two, but it's, you know, besides the, you know, number one priority, of course, is to make sure we have water that flows and toilets that flush and water that flows away from your house and not up into your house. And you all saw about a month ago, the reason why we made Mountain House Creek so wide. There's a good reason for that. And the reason we have that big basin over there at Grant Line Road and College Park, because we get a lot of rain off the hills. And when we get up to the north side of town, where you're at 10 feet above sea level instead of 100, we have to be really careful the way things drain, and we have to put money into all those things also. And so being a city does give us more ability to generate revenue, but there's trade-offs on that too. You know, shopping centers generate sales tax, but they also generate a lot more police services, the more of them that you have. So there's a balance in these things. And so we want to make sure that we're safe, but we also have, you know, I don't think you're a community without parks. I think everybody would agree. You know, you might as well just live out in the middle of nowhere if you don't have parks. You know, this is what defines what people do in their spare time. And that's why, you know, I think you'd be hard pressed to find anywhere else where you've got a 5-acre park in the middle of every neighborhood and every person within a 5-minute walk of a park. I think you'd have a hard time, 5 or 10 minute, I guess 10-minute walk of a park. I don't think you have that anywhere else, but we have to make sure that we can maintain them and not have them all fall apart. And I'm sure you've all lived in communities where, particularly after the last recession, you saw a lot of parks getting very tired and old. And so we want to maintain those, just like we want to maintain, you know, we're now going to be maintaining all the street trees in the neighborhoods as well, because that's an important part of all our open space also. But we'll be having a meeting or two later this year about incorporation and all the pros and cons and, you know, what it'll bring us to be incorporated. Can we have a follow-up survey for deciding the phases? Well, I think that's where we need feedback now, but certainly before we finalize any construction, there will always be additional meetings and dialogue. A lot of the discussion and phasing, as I said earlier, is really going to be dependent on construction costs and what we can afford. Let's see, can we have more multi-courts with reservation fees? Well, I mean, that's something as we get into the detail, you know, we're trying to look mainly at doing reservations in the Central Park, but potentially for badminton and things like that. But again, the reservation fees, they don't recover the costs. You know, none of these become money makers. You know, we're a community and we want to provide what the demand is, but you know, we're not a private gym where I don't think anybody wants to charge $40 an hour for the court, because then nobody would end up using it. There's some things that make sense, but I don't know what you've seen, but on sport courts, I don't think there's a model that really works other than maybe for tennis for a partial cost recovery.
Right, but nothing for full recovery.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's the challenge. So we say 22, but it's the same acreage as last time, 23.8.
Right. Yep.
So it hasn't been changed at all. Is there any park coming next to Costa School? Yes, we're going to be getting that. We'll probably have design meetings on that, hopefully by later this year. Again, it's all dependent on us getting the developer who controls the land under the PG&E line, kind of adjacent behind those 4 original houses. That person wants to extend his map, and I think as part of us letting him wait to put his map in, we're going to be asking him to deed that land over to us so we can get the park started sooner than later. And just a reminder that the Costa School is 2.5 acres. It's 18 acres. The rest of the schools are around 15 acres in town. I think there might be 116, but it's significantly, their open space is significantly larger at Costa School. And that's because they did want to have enough room for a large additional play field that could have a cricket pitch. And I think at one of the meetings, I showed the drawing of the open space that's going to be associated with Costa School. And then, of course, we want to tie the park into that as well. So that, and then the area going up the Crimson right away will be the second park in that neighborhood. Here, I was worried at first we weren't going to get any questions, and how wrong was I? Is there any interest from companies for office space? No. I can tell you there's zero interest in office space in town at this point in time. In fact, we've done a survey and different data showing that there's an incredible I have to tell you, you live here, but there's an incredible percentage of the community that does work 3 to 4 days a week at home. So we actually, because of all the folks working from home, we have the equivalent of 500,000 square feet of office space. So one of those big buildings over there at Oracle, we have the equivalent of a 20-story building in town of everybody just working from their home right now. So yes, we do have an office complex and it's all in one of your rooms at home. If we've probably got 3,000 houses with a home office in this town. So folks are wondering if we have an employment base in Mountain House. We do. So yeah, somebody else asked about the timeline in phase one, and we're working to try to get it approved this year and then see when the money can become available. So if it was planned already, why didn't you forecast the cost of construction? Well, they did, and they were assuming the construction would go up with inflation, and in the last 20 years, it's left inflation in the dust. So there's nothing we can do about that. And we can only raise fees, as I said earlier, if we raise the fees to exactly the cost of construction, nothing would get built. So we have to find the middle ground as to what's fiscally sustainable. All right, another person asked about the neighborhood parks bathrooms. Can we have a sustainable model for the swimming pool also? Like I said, hopefully we can get some cost recovery off of the play pool, but the lap pool is going to be at least $300,000-400,000 a year, if not more, in cost. No matter how much we charge, it's going to exceed it. And it'll be a 25-meter pool, because a 50-meter pool, which you use once a year for a meet, costs it's twice as big and 4 times as expensive to maintain. It's amazing. Go in the pump. Next time, if you have a kid who's a swimmer, compare the pump room for a 25-meter pool versus a 50-meter pool. There's no, the complexity is exponential, and 95% of the time, they have a bulkhead in the middle of that 50-meter pool where you're just using one half or the other because nobody wants to practice in a 50-meter pool because it's too long. Sorry, pool trivia. I had to go visit about 10 of them one time, so you learn all these things. Another one asking about, I think I already answered that one. Already answered that one. Answered that one. Morning. Trustee Court. Okay. Okay. Can we include the PG&E trails in phase one? I think the problem is that the PG&E trails are too far away from phase one, but maybe they're meaning the Crimson potentially.
Yeah, there's a section of this part of the Crimson pipeline that would be within phase one. But we can't include all of it. And we won't be doing the trails outside of the park. So those will be done by, through different means as part of the neighborhood trail system.
All right, additional question. Would it be possible to make some area earmarked for cricket grounds to local clubs to develop temporarily? We are doing that right now. We're looking at some additional space that's not being used right now in Central Park. We partially graded it. We're working on temporary fields at Central Park. And potentially you can show the areas at the far east here. We could also temporarily use for cricket grounds as well. We've just got to, hopefully we're going to be doing some grading in the spring, because anybody who's been out to South Community Park, you'd have to be looking down on it. So we've been using a lot of dirt from other projects so that we can start building up the grade at South Community Park. So for both the short-term and long-term needs of the park. So yeah, we are having those conversations. All right, make sure I got them all right here. Oh, I like this one. Any plan to widen Grantline Road to 580? So the challenge we have with Grantline Road when it leaves town, first of all, it's in Alameda County. And up until about 3-4 years ago, they didn't even want to talk to us because they're still very upset that Mountain House was built in the first place. In fact, when we had the Mountain House 101, we had some of the original maps. Originally, the developer purchased 5,000 acres in San Joaquin County and 2,000 acres on the other side of Great Valley Parkway. And the original idea was Mountain House Creek was going to go all the way down to like the Mountain House restaurant. And they were going to have a grand entryway into Mountain House off of the Altamont exit. And that the original development would all be on the Alameda County side, then it would grow this direction. It's a pretty interesting map showing it coming in. And Alameda County said, drop dead. The developer decided he had enough problems already. So they ended up focusing just on San Joaquin County because they already had Alameda County and Contra Costa County, which is nearby, threatening to sue them if they came near them at all. So Now, thanks a lot to President Tingle and others. We've got a much better relationship because of Valley Link, I think, when you say with Alameda County, where they know they need us. They can't get a train to Livermore unless it comes over the hill for the other 99,000 people a day, because Livermore won't build any houses. Livermore doesn't generate enough demand. It's everybody they pushed over the hill 30 years ago when they refused to build houses to justify Valley Link. So now Alameda County understands they need to work with us because they've figured out that we are the community that serves all the employers in the East Bay. And about 35 years ago, they made this conscious decision that we really don't want people, we just want the jobs generated by business. So they pushed everybody over the hill, and now they realize they better take care of those folks who are their employees. So they now agree that they do need to address the issues on Grant Line Road. But that does not include widening the road, because if you widen the road and you get to 580 and it's back down to narrow lanes, you haven't done anything. But what we can do is make the trip between here and the 580 smoother by getting rid of the stop signs and putting in 2 traffic circles. And again, the challenge with construction costs, 10 years ago, they thought it would be $8 million to widen Grant Line Road and put in signals. Now it's almost $8 million just to put in the 2 traffic circles. And again, even if we could widen it, it wouldn't really help much, but I think putting in the traffic circles will. And by the way, trying to widen it and trying to work with the folks at the aqueduct, it would take 20 or 30 years to get the land to widen Grant Line Road. It may happen someday before we have flying cars, but I'm not sure when. But the good news is, after many years of work, many years of work, Alameda County has now agreed to cooperate with us and allow us to go and build these 2 traffic circles. So we're furiously having meetings now with our designer, and we're hoping to come back with a design later this year on those traffic circles. In best case, start construction in a year and a half. But, you know, there's always these additional regulatory hoops. We'll be able to give you a better update later this year on when those traffic circles will get done. But we realize for anybody who commutes, and I know we have a couple people in town who commute, that is a very, very high priority. So I'm glad somebody asked about 580. They're saying, with the growing number of houses, how can we use this small park? Again, this is an above average community park. There's many communities that don't have, larger than us, that don't have near the number of parks this size that we do. So I think there's plenty of people at any one time that can be accommodated in this park. And again, we're well over the requirements for park space per capita. So why no badminton, volleyball, even though those top selections, they are included,
They are
correct?
included as part of the multi-purpose.
Right.
Sports.
Right. Why so much importance to cricket, which is cutting 2 soccer fields? These are multi-use fields, right?
Yeah, they're multi-purpose fields. We're just showing that you can fit cricket on it. You can fit soccer on it, but you could also play any other sport that you want to play on there.
And again, timing is going to be dependent on funding. Then more about the 9 acres. And again, as I explained, we need the money for the 9 acres. Let me see if I put stuff in the right pile. So, okay, I answered this one. Answered this one. So I need bigger playground for elementary age kids. Yes, we are putting in, we're putting in 2 additional neighborhood parks, and there will be some play areas over at Costa School as well. I know it's frustrating, but one of the things I did at our Mountain House 101 was to show you that typically we try to get the parks done by the time 80% of the houses are built, and we've come close in some of the neighborhoods, but when you have these hiccups in the economy, it's always a challenge because the money has to keep coming in from construction. And as you know, right now, construction other than the apartments has come to a halt, but we're doing everything we can to keep construction going. But I would ask anybody who wants to know about timing to go onto Google Earth. And I think most of you know that on Google Earth, you can click on the little timeline and take a look at how Mountain House has evolved over time. It's also in the slideshow I showed the night of the meeting, that meeting on the 25th. And the folks in Altamont, and she's being quiet in the back of the room and not saying anything, But back in 2008, when well, first of all, what happened is that the original developer spent so much money on Wickland Park that Bethany Park and Altamont Park got half the budget they were supposed to, and we're not going to allow that to happen again. Second thing that happened is that when the recession hit, they had already built all the roads in Cuesta and built virtually no houses. And the developers were trying to figure out during that dead market, how do we get people to move to Cuesta? We've got all the roads in, we've got all this money invested, what do we do? So they convinced the school district to build Cuesta School before Altamont School. So you had a fully built out neighborhood, and then everybody had to go to school in the empty neighborhood. So there's been lots of challenges, I think, in the past where we are trying to make sure now that we don't have those kinds of disruptions, interruptions. We want to do everything we can that when you move in a neighborhood, that we get amenities in there as quickly as possible. Easier said than done because the economy does get in the way. But we are trying, we worked with Jerry over here, who's the master developer for College Park, to try and make sure that we can get the park started now and not 5 or 7 years from now. But it's been a challenge over the years because the county made it clear. The developers have to pay for everything. And so we're trying to find some creative solutions to expedite this, but we don't want to have happen what happened in the past. It bothers me every much as it bothers you to sit there seeing houses with not enough amenities around them, but we're trying to move as quickly as we can. To get the school built in a timely manner, we worked with Jerry to, because not all the houses are in to pay for the school. Jerry fronted $14 million last year to make sure that we could get Costa School underway, because the last thing we want is there not to be enough room for all the kids in Costa School. The other master developer, MHD, we just worked with them because the high school is running out of space and there wasn't enough land dedicated to the high school originally. We were supposed to have 2 high schools, not 1. And when the original Tracy High School District decided they wanted Mountain House kids going to Kimball and only have to build 1 high school in Mountain House, they should have given more acreage for this school, but they did not. And so as our high school expands, if they have to build more buildings, they're going to run out of play space for the practice space for the kids. So the land at the intersection of Grant Line Road and Central Parkway, the northeast corner, that 20 acres, the other master developer is now dedicating that land to the school district to either build additional classrooms or additional play space to make sure that, unlike other school districts, we're always going to make sure there's enough classrooms to accommodate everybody who's going to have kids in school. So let's see, they said, can we do something like the Imagination Playground in Dublin?
That's something that we will certainly explore as we get more in depth in the playground design.
Where can I get slides of today's meeting? We will post the slides online
Mhm.
on our website. Let me make sure I make a note of that, although I think they did over there. Slides online. Yeah, we're working on getting more and more information on the website. All right, I already asked about the restrooms. Timeline. Hold on, I'm just going back through all the questions, make sure I didn't miss anybody. All right, I think we're all wrapped up then. And as I said at the beginning, if you have, thank you for all your time. And if you have specific questions, we can hang around for those if you want to have some one-on-one conversations. But we appreciate all of your time. And Bernice, did you want to say anything at the end? And we'll let you know when we have more information. You know, we'll get it out to the community when we've finalized all this information. But thanks for coming. Thanks for everybody to fill out the survey. And let's all have our fingers crossed that interest rates behave and we can get more revenue coming in, and let's hope that somehow construction costs drop. The sooner the better, the more we can do in phase one, the better. So thank you.
Thank you.